The rancher had carried a wounded tribal girl across the saddle. By the next sunrise, he woke bound to a tree. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The coarse rope chewed into Eli Boone Laramie's wrists, drawing blood as he strained against the oak. Sunlight filtered through thick branches, scattering restless shadows over his face, while his horse grazed 30 yards away, unconcerned with his master's misery. Every pulse hammered inside his skull. Fragments of the day before drifted back like smoke. Just 24 hours earlier, all had been ordinary. Eli Boone Laramie was riding the eastern fence line of his spread, scanning for breaks where his herd might drift into Apache country. At 30, he knew this land like scripture, each ridge and hollow etched into his mind from years of work across his 2,000 Montana acres. October air whispered of an early winter aspens, already aflame in gold beneath snow-dusted peaks. His stallion ranger picked carefully along a rocky trail winding through scattered pines. Eli had been thinking about the cattle drive to Billings when smoke curled up from a hidden hollow. Too steady for wildfire, too far from any cabin he knew. Curiosity beat caution. He nudged Ranger down a game path, twisting through tangled brush. At the valley floor, the sight hit like a nightmare in broad daylight. 3 wagons blazed canvas tops, consumed by flames clawing toward the sky. Bodies lay strewn across the clearing, some face down, others broken at strange angles. Eli slid from the saddle, his hand settling on the colt at his side. The attack was fresh smoke, still thick, the ground slick with blood. Moving with wary steps, he searched each fallen soul for life. They had been travelers, likely a family bound west, chasing fortune in the California goldfields. Their belongings littered the earth, a child's wooden doll with yarn hair, a Bible flapping in the wind, a photograph of a stern-faced man in Sunday best. Then faint a moan. Eli froze. Behind the largest wagon, half hidden under a bloodied blanket, something stirred. His boots cracked glass from a shattered lantern as he knelt. He pulled back the cloth and found her. She looked no older than 20, long black braids threaded with beads and feathers that marked her Apache blood. Blood welled from a deep cut in her shoulder, her buckskin torn and stained. Her dark eyes opened, filled with both pain and defiance. Most men would have left her to die. Raids had been rising tensions sharp between settlers and tribes. But something in her gaze stopped him cold. She tried to rise, grimacing as her wound tore wider, spilling fresh blood into the soil. Without thinking, Eli grabbed his canteen and a clean bandana. She spoke fast in Apache words he couldn't grasp, but meaning plain, she believed he meant to finish the job. Instead, he eased her down and washed the wound. The gash was deep, yet clean, likely a knife. With steady hands, he wrapped her shoulder tight to slow the bleeding. She never looked away, studying him with unnerving intensity. When he finished, she tried again to stand, swaying weakly. Eli caught her arm. She was bleeding too much. The nearest town was 2 days' ride across dangerous country. Alone, she'd never make it. Wolves and worse would find her before dawn. The safe choice was to leave her water and jerky, then fetch help. The expected choice was to treat her as the enemy and hand her over. But instead, Eli lifted her onto Ranger. She was light, trembling with shock as he settled her before the saddle. Her head dropped against his chest as her consciousness faded. The ranch lay 3 hours' ride at a careful pace, long enough for fever to take hold if the wound soured. The sun slipped toward the western ridges as they reached his homestead, nestled in a bowl of rolling hills, log house, and barn standing proud cattle, grazing unaware. Eli carried her inside, laying her on the leather sofa in his front room. She drifted in and out as he cleaned and dressed the injury drawing from the well-stocked medicine chest his late wife, Loretta Jane Hollis, had insisted on keeping ready. The cut had missed bone and major vessels. Painful, yes, but not fatal, if kept clean. By evening, he set beans and cornbread on the table, uncertain if she could eat, but knowing she needed strength. She stirred as he placed the plate beside her. Her dark eyes darted around the room, measuring every escape route, every threat. Eli. Boone Laramie eased into a chair a few feet away, keeping his hands in plain sight. The last thing he wanted was to spook a girl who'd already been through hell. She spoke again in Apache, her voice steadier now, though still sharp with mistrust. When he shook his head, she shifted into broken but determined English. "Why you help me?" Suspicion colored her tone, yet there was genuine curiosity beneath it. Boone weighed the question, careful with his answer. He could have said it was Christian duty, or that he would have done the same for anyone lying half dead in the dirt. Both were true, but not the whole truth. Felt like the right thing he said quietly under the glow of the lantern. "You were hurt, and I had the means to help." She studied him a long moment, her eyes searching his face for some hidden motive. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, while cattle lowed in the dark pastures beyond. "My people did not do this," she said suddenly, touching her wounded shoulder. "White men painted their faces. They wanted it to look like Apache work." The words struck Boone hard. Men disguising themselves to stir hatred and war was not unheard of, though almost impossible to prove. Opportunists had long staged raids, scattering arrows and relics to cast blame where it didn't belong. "You saw who did this?" he asked. She nodded, her gaze dark. 3 men. One with yellow hair, a scar down his face. They butchered the family, then spotted me in the trees. I ran, but not fast enough. A cold weight settled in Boone's chest. If she spoke true, 3 killers now counted on racial prejudice to shield them. By tomorrow, word of the massacre would spread, and Apache bands would pay for crimes they hadn't committed. She must have read his thoughts, for she pressed on, her voice firm despite exhaustion. "My name is Marisol 2 Moons. I was gathering herbs when they struck. My people camp 2 days north, but I cannot return like this. They will think I led the killers." Her plight deepened with every word. Wounded far from her camp, and facing suspicion even from her own. For Boone, harboring an Apache woman would only feed gossip among neighbors already angry he hadn't joined the militia. But casting her out was as good as a death sentence. As if sensing his hesitation, Marisol tried to rise. Pain tore through her shoulder, and fresh blood stained the bandages. Boone steadied her back down. "You stay put," he said firmly. "That wound needs time, and you need rest." Her eyes widened, startled at the kindness of a white rancher. "You risk much. Your neighbors will not understand. My neighbors don't run this ranch," Boone answered, though they both knew the truth was heavier. The night passed quiet, Boone checking her dressings, making sure she drank water. Near midnight, weariness claimed her, and she slept deeply on the sofa. Boone sat alone in the kitchen, wrestling with the weight of his choice. Tomorrow would bring trouble, but for now he had listened to his conscience. Coyotes called from the hills, their cries carrying like omens on the wind. Just before dawn, he finally sought his bed boots set by the door, gun belt hanging within reach. Sleep came ragged, haunted by burning wagons and painted faces he could never quite see. When morning light broke through the window, birdsong filled the oak outside. Boone stirred, disoriented. Then reality hit. He was tied to a tree. Marisol was gone. The ropes bit deep, expertly knotted snug enough to hold him, yet not to cut circulation. His boots were missing, though his clothes untouched. Most telling, his gun was gone. The air smelled of damp earth and pine needles, while his cattle grazed, as though nothing were amiss. The calmness of it all made his captivity more unreal. Footsteps came steady through the brush. Marisol emerged from the thicket with surprising strength for someone who had nearly bled out. His rifle rested in one hand, a small leather pouch in the other. Her shoulder was still wrapped, but she moved with unnerving ease. Either she was tougher than he guessed, or sheer will masked her pain. Her eyes carried none of the gratitude he had expected, only sharp calculation. "Good morning, Eli Boone Laramie," she said, settling onto a fallen log 10 feet away. He froze at the sound of his full name. He hadn't told her. "Morning," he replied cautiously, testing the ropes. They held firm. "Mind telling me what this is about?" Marisol opened the pouch and pulled out jerky a small knife and a bundle of herbs. She chewed with deliberate slowness, eyes fixed on him, as though memorizing every line of his face. "You helped me yesterday," she said between bites. "That was not what I expected, so I tied you to a tree. Strange way to say thank you, isn't it?" A smile touched her lips, the first he'd seen. For a fleeting second, humor broke through the suspicion. The shift in her face startled him. It was as though the layers of suspicion and hurt peeled back for a heartbeat, showing a spark of the woman beneath. "I had to be certain of your intentions, Marisol," Two Moons said evenly. "Men who lend a hand to an Apache woman usually expect payment." The words hung between them like smoke curling off a dying fire, heavy, dangerous, impossible to ignore. Eli Boone Laramie understood her caution, though the rope cutting into his wrists made patience difficult. "And what did you decide?" he asked. She chewed slowly, taking her time, as if weighing his very life, which in truth she was. "You sleep like a dead man," she answered at last. "Mighty trusting for someone sheltering an enemy." "You're not my enemy," Boone replied. "Your neighbors would say different." She wasn't wrong. Settlers and Apache were walking a razor's edge. Every spark threatened to set the prairie ablaze. Trust was a luxury, and mercy often looked like betrayal. Marisol rose and drifted closer, stopping just beyond his reach. Her movements were smooth, steady, too steady for someone with a fresh wound. She crouched beside him close enough for him to catch the scent of sage in her hair. "The men who butchered that family," she whispered, "they will strike again. Again and again until your people and mine are driven to war. Then let me help you stop them." The words came out before Boone had time to measure them, yet once spoken they felt right. Justice demanded more than good intentions. Marisol's eyes narrowed, searching his face for a lie. Whatever she found there satisfied her, because she reached behind the tree and drew out his knife. "Very well, Eli Boone Laramie," she said, sawing through the ropes. "But we follow my way." As the bonds fell away, Boone rubbed life back into his hands, trying to grasp how fast the tide had turned. Yesterday, he'd been a solitary rancher. Now he was tied to a cause with an Apache woman beside him, and the trail ahead promised death as much as truth. "What exactly is your way?" he asked, slipping into his boots and strapping on his gun belt. But Marisol was already heading for his horse, her manner showing little taste for long discussions. She swung onto Ranger with practiced ease, sitting behind the saddle like she belonged there. "We hunt the men with painted faces," she said, "and we make them pay." The Montana sun climbed higher as Boone mounted up. Behind him, his ranch sat quiet and steady, a symbol of years of sweat and toil. Ahead waited danger, uncertainty, and the faint hope of justice for the Monroe family. Yet as they rode out into the wild, Boone felt an unexpected lift of hope. Marisol, Two Moons, was a puzzle, but one thing was plain: she got things done. The chase was on. For the first hour, silence rode with them. She guided their way with small shifts of her body directing without words. Her knowledge of the land was uncanny. She knew each deer trail, every hidden spring, every high perch where the country spread wide before them. The landscape hardened as they pushed north and east. Rolling plains gave way to jagged ridges, shadowed timber, and steep canyons deep enough to swallow a herd. Boone found himself checking their back trail, often wary of an ambush. Near midday, Marisol halted by a creek spilling cold from the mountains. They let Ranger drink, then took rest in the shade of a towering cottonwood. Boone watched as she knelt to drink from her hands, her motions efficient, giving away none of the weakness he expected from her wound. Either she was tougher than most men he'd met, or she hid her pain like a secret. "How's the shoulder?" he asked at last. "It will mend." "That's not what I asked." A small smile tugged at her mouth. "No, it's not." She crossed to him, fluid as ever, and unwrapped the bandage without warning. The gash was angry red at the edges, but showed no pus, no new blood. Somehow it was already closing. Boone blinked, surprised. "You tended it well," she said, rewrapping the cloth with practiced hands. "My grandmother Willowhawk taught me the healing plants. I gathered some while you slept." That explained much and raised more questions. She could have ended him in his sleep, yet hadn't. That truth sat both comforting and troubling in his gut. "Tell me about those painted men," Boone pressed. Marisol eased onto a flat rock, keeping distance even as she spoke. Her eyes drifted far off, and her voice took on the rhythm of a tale. "I was gathering wild onions in the valley when the first screams tore the air." Her words slipped into a rhythm, the cadence of someone raised on stories carried by firelight. The Monroe family had been camped there 2 days, resting their oxen, before climbing Blackfoot Pass. She stopped mid-tale to scan the timberline, a habit born of knowing nowhere was ever truly safe. Convinced they were alone, Marisol. 2 moons went on. 3 riders came from the east, driving hard. Their faces were painted like warriors, but the marks were wrong. My people paint for the spirits, for protection. These men painted to trick the eye. The meaning was plain, though Eli Boone Laramie let her finish before weighing judgment. False raids weren't unheard of. Men hungry for profit or power had long staged massacres, scattering tribal weapons to stoke hate. Their leader had yellow hair, a scar running from eye to jaw, and carried a rifle silvered along the stock. Another was short, dark-haired, missing a finger. The last sat a paint horse, white blaze across its face. Her sharp recall amazed Boone, given she had been hiding for her life. They took nothing, she continued. No coin, no supplies. They spread Apache arrows among the dead, planted a lance by the largest wagon, then set fire to it all. They laughed as they rode off. The picture was clear murder, not for gain, but for war. Such chaos always lined the pockets of speculators and politicos eager to call for troops. "Did you know them?" Boone pressed. Marisol shook her head. "Not Apache, not settlers I've seen, but the yellow-haired one. He wore a badge. I saw it glint when he bent over the bodies." Boone's stomach turned. If Cyrus Kane bore a badge, this was more than outlaw greed. It reached into law itself. Deputies, marshals, even army men had been known to cross lines when money and ambition pulled the strings. "We need to ride back to that valley," Boone muttered, already planning. "Already done," Marisol said, pulling a leather pouch from her dress. She spread its contents across her palm, a brass button stamped with an eagle, a shred of cloth torn from a shirt, and a horseshoe with a curious wear pattern. The button snagged on a thorn. The fabric caught on the lance they left. "The shoe came from the paint horse I found the place they waited before striking." Boone studied each piece. The button was army issue. The cloth plain civilian. The shoe carried a blacksmith's mark, one he might trace if luck was kind. "You've been busy," he said. "My people don't live waiting for others to bring justice. We take care of our own." Her words were matter of fact, not boastful. While he had slept under his roof, she had returned to the killing ground, wounded and alone, piecing together proof. The steel of her will left him humbled. They mounted and pushed on Marisol, guiding them by paths that seemed to twist nowhere. She read the land like scripture eyes catching what Boone could not. By afternoon, the trail steepened. Shale slid beneath rangers' hooves, and the lodgepole pines thickened until midday felt like twilight. Boone's patience wore thin. "Where are we headed?" he asked, at a rest. "To someone who may know about men with painted faces and soldiers' buttons," she said, offering no more. Her caution was hard to swallow, yet understandable. Trust wasn't a coin easily spent. At last, the trees thinned, giving way to a high plateau. Peaks rolled to every horizon, snowcaps gleaming like steel in the sun. Far below, rivers wound through valleys bright with grass. Marisol dismounted and led him to the edge of a canyon so deep its bottom was lost in shadow. Boone admired the beauty, but thought of how exposed they were, visible for miles. "Fine country," he said. "My grandmother Willowhawk brought me here as a child," Marisol whispered. "She taught me to see what white men do not." "What sort of signs?" Boone asked. She lifted her hand toward a distant ridge where a thin column of smoke rose. To Boone, it was just a campfire. Her eyes told him otherwise. 3 fires spaced evenly. "It is a message." Boone stared harder, and sure enough, she was right. What Boone first thought was one column of smoke was in fact 3 rising apart at even intervals along the ridge. Too precise to be chance. "What does it mean?" he asked. "Strangers in Apache country." Marisol. 2 moons translated her tone, sharp. Armed. Dangerous. The message was clear they were marked, and word had already traveled. Whether those listening were allies or enemies was anyone's guess. Eli Boone Laramie instinctively checked the weight of his revolver, his eyes sweeping every ridge for signs of an ambush. "Friends of yours?" he asked. Perhaps she said, though her voice carried doubt, more than assurance. They swung back into their saddles and followed a narrow descent into the canyon. The trail zigzagged steeply, rangers' hooves knocking stones loose, sending them clattering into the depths. Heat built the lower, they dropped the rock walls, trapping it like a furnace. By the canyon floor, sweat stained horse and rider alike, despite the crisp October air above. A stream wound along the bottom, shaded by willow, and wild rose an oasis in the red stone world. Its cool murmur was a balm against the silence, yet Boone noticed Marisol never eased her guard. "We walk from here," she said, stripping Ranger's saddle. "How far? Not far. But horses cannot go where we must." She led the stallion to a grove, where he could drink and graze well hidden, yet with escape routes if danger struck. Her choice was no accident, she thought like a strategist. They pressed on by foot, following the stream deeper into the gorge, single file. She walked like she belonged to the land, while Boone stumbled over paths that vanished and reappeared at will. Towers of stone loomed above, carved into shapes that looked like cathedrals by some ancient hand. Nearly an hour later, they came to a red wall of stone, blocking the way forward. Boone's heart sank, but Marisol pressed her palms against the rock as though searching for something unseen. "Here." She slipped into a narrow crack barely wide enough for her slim frame. Boone followed, scraping his shoulders through. On the other side lay a hidden valley walled by cliffs. A waterfall poured into a small lake grass, thick and green flowers blooming though frost should have claimed them. A cabin of stone and timber stood at the center, smoke curling from its chimney, a neat garden stretching beside it. Marisol's voice softened. "This is my grandmother's home." An old woman stepped out as they approached. Her hair, white as snow, was braided with beads and feathers that marked her station. Her eyes glimmered with wit and wisdom as she looked Boone over, speaking in swift Apache to her granddaughter while studying him openly. After several moments, she turned to him. Her English was firm, heavily accented, yet precise. "My granddaughter says you saved her life. That is not something I expected of a white rancher." Boone hesitated, then answered simply, "I did what I thought was right." The elder grandmother Willowhawk laughed, rich and full. "No, you did what you chose. There is a difference." She motioned toward the cabin. "Come, sit. Eat. Then we speak of these men with painted faces who shame us all." Inside the cabin proved larger than it looked, divided into neat spaces, stove, and hearth beds, with woven blankets, herbs drying from the rafters. At the center stood a heavy table. "Sit," she ordered. "You will eat first." They shared venison stew, rich with herbs, cornbread from a Dutch oven, and tea brewed from plants Boone couldn't name, yet found strangely soothing. Silence hung between bites, but Willowhawk's eyes measured them both carefully. When the bowls were cleared, she spoke. "I am Willowhawk. Among my people, I am what you might call a medicine woman. That word is too small, but it will do." She opened a pouch and laid out the evidence Marisol had gathered: the brass button, the torn cloth, the marked horseshoe. "These tell a story," she said, arranging them with deliberate care, "but not the one you expect." Boone leaned closer, hungry for her judgment. She touched the button. "Cavalry issue old 10 years, perhaps. This cloth Eastern make fine costly. Not for common soldiers." She lifted the horseshoe, turning it until the light showed the uneven wear. "This horse bears weight wrong, heavy on the right side. The rider's missing his left leg below the knee," Grandmother Willowhawk said, her sharp eyes fixed on the worn horseshoe. "Lost it to war, most like. The wooden peg he rides with changes the way he sits a horse." Her insight cut deep, turning scraps of metal and cloth into the outline of a man. Eli. Boone Laramie couldn't help but marvel at how she drew meaning from details others would overlook. "The paint horse with the white blaze," she went on, "belongs to a man named Garrett Wells. He runs freight between Fort Benton and the mining camps in the Judith Mountains. I have seen him more than once. At last they had a name and a trail. What had felt like chasing ghosts now shifted into a hunt with focus, and Boone felt the stirrings of hope that justice might not be out of reach. "Where can we find this Garrett Wells?" Boone asked. Willowhawk gave a grim smile. "That depends on whether he knows you're looking." Her words hung in the air like wood smoke, heavy with warning. Her eyes carried the weight of decades watching white and Apache lives clash and twist together, seeing patterns invisible to those caught in daily struggle. "Garrett Wells is not a man to flee," she said finally, settling into her chair with the ease of someone long acquainted with hardship. "He faces trouble straight on, usually with a gun in hand and anger burning in his chest, the cabin filled with the golden slant of late afternoon sun shadows, stretching across the table where the evidence lay scattered like puzzle pieces." Boone studied them again, trying to see the larger story. "Tell us about Wells," he urged. He knew knowledge would be their sharpest weapon. Willowhawk reached for a clay pipe on the mantel, stuffing it with tobacco and herbs. Lighting it from the fire, She drew deep, the ritual steadying her mind. Fragrant smoke curled toward the rafters. Garrett Wells came into Montana Territory 15 years back, she began. A Confederate veteran looking to start anew after defeat. He carried more coin than any common soldier should, and with it he built his freight line. She rose to feed the fire, another log, the flames snapping and filling the room with warmth against the canyon's creeping chill. Outside, the wind howled down the stone walls, an eerie chorus to her tale. At first he looked like any other veteran trying to scratch out a life. Hauled goods, hauled mail, supplied mining camps, carried what the weather or the Indian troubles interrupted. Marisol, 2 moons, shifted, restless. She wanted action, not history, but Boone recognized the value in understanding the man's mind as well as his movements. What changed, Boone asked. Willowhawk's face darkened. Gold. Found in the Judiths 3 years past. Not enough for another California rush, but plenty to draw men and the vultures that follow them. Smoke curled around her words as she continued. Wells saw profit in the chaos. His wagons carried more than supplies. Rifles, powder pistols sold to anyone with the silver. Settlers, miners, even Apache warriors desperate to protect what's left of their hunting grounds. The truth hit Boone hard. If Wells armed all sides, he had both the power and the reason to spark bloodshed. Gun running fills pockets. Willowhawk said, her voice low. But it's a fragile game. Too much peace and demand fades. Too much war and no road is safe. Wells learned to feed conflict the way a rancher feeds cattle, just enough to keep it growing. Marisol leaned forward, her eyes lit by the fire. You think he staged the massacre to raise tensions? I think Garrett Wells learned that shaping the story of war can be as profitable as selling the tools to fight it, Willowhawk answered. When peace threatened his business, he lit sparks to fan the flames again. Boone felt the pieces lock into place. False raids, painted faces, veterans skilled in killing. A man like Wells could buy accomplices, recruit men like Cyrus Kane, Virgil Pike, or Amos Whiteface Greeley without blinking. Where do we find him? Marisol pressed, ready to turn talk into action. Willowhawk moved to a chest in the corner and pulled out a hand-drawn map. Rivers, trails, and passes inked with care notes of which were open year-round and which closed with snow. She tapped a point northeast. His headquarters sits in Maiden, a mining town in the Judith Mountains 50 miles from here. But Wells runs way stations, 2 safe houses for his trade. He could be at any of them. Grandmother Willowhawk pointed out 3 more marks on the map, each one planted at crossroads, where trails joined or narrow passes forced all traffic through. This one here, Crow Creek Crossing, she said, tapping a valley no more than 20 miles away. 2 buildings, a corral. 4 or 5 men keep it running freight transfers guarding Wells' shipments. Eli Boone Laramie leaned over the table, eyes tracing the ridge lines around the spot. The valley lay surrounded by hills good for scouting unseen, but a noose if things soured. How fresh is this? He asked. Her smile held no warmth. 3 days. My grandson traded pelts for cartridges there. Wells himself was present with 2 men who matched Marisol's descriptions. Boone's jaw tightened. Too convenient, too neat. Wells was either hiding in plain sight or baiting a snare. Could be a trap, Marisol 2 Moons said quietly. Everything about this smells like a trap, Boone answered. But hiding from risk won't bring justice. As night fell over the hidden valley, they laid their plans with grim precision. Willowhawk gave them details of the station, how the men bunked the strong points they'd use, where Wells would likely stand and fight. He's clever, not timid, she warned. If cornered, he won't beg, he'll shoot. His men are veterans, same as he. They won't flinch from killing. She disappeared into the cabin's shadows, and returned with gear that spoke of another life. A second rifle cartridges stacked neatly, a pair of field glasses, supplies packed for long miles. Boone raised a brow. "Where'd all this come from?" "My husband scouted for the Army Willowhawk," replied flatly. "When he died, I kept his tools. A woman learns to be ready." They spent the evening tending weapons-oiling barrels, testing gear. Boone noted how easily Marisol handled a rifle. No hesitation, her hands sure. He shouldn't have been surprised. Survival in Apache country demanded skill with every weapon within reach. When the fire sank to embers, Willowhawk arranged their sleeping places apart for modesty, yet angled, so each had a clear line to the door. Her quiet expertise carried the weight of a lifetime spent reading danger in the wind. "Rest now," she told them. "Tomorrow will measure what you're made of." Boone stretched on his bedroll near the lone window, listening to the hush of the valley. His mind twisted through the stakes outlaws on home ground, no badge, no law to shield them. Yet letting Wells walk free while the Monroe family lay cold in their graves was unthinkable. Sometimes a man had to ride past the law to keep justice alive. Morning came steel-gray frost, lacing the grass thin ice on the lake's edge. They ate the last of the stew with cornbread, while Willowhawk sketched final bearings on a strip of bark with a charred stick. "Follow the stream till you see the rocks shaped like a sleeping bear. Climb the ridge left of it. North on the game trail 3 miles. And if trouble finds you here, are the other ways out." The sun cleared the canyon wall as they left the sanctuary, squeezing back through the crack in the stone. The world outside felt harsher, the air sharp. But Boone's blood burned hotter purpose, pushing him forward. Ranger waited in the aspens, ears pricked none the worse for his night alone. The stallion shifted eagerly beneath him, as if he knew the hunt was close. They pushed hard, riding the rough trail Willowhawk had traced. By noon, they reined in at a rise overlooking Crow Creek Crossing, 2 buildings, and a corral laid out below smoke, curling lazily, the stage set for reckoning. The station lay exactly where Grandmother Willowhawk had marked it, a scatter of weather-beaten buildings tucked beside a stream that watered stock and men alike. Smoke curled lazy from a chimney, and horses grazed inside a rough-hewn corral, proof enough the place was occupied. Eli Boone Laramie steadied the field glasses and studied every line of the layout. 2 main buildings, one larger structure that likely doubled as living quarters and office, the other serving as storehouse or stable. Off to the side, a lean-to shed hugged the creek bank. How many Marisol 2 moons whispered from the juniper thicket where they crouched? Hard to say, Boone murmured, eyes still fixed on the compound. At least 3. Could be more holed up inside. Movement at the corral drew his gaze. A man limped from the main house, his stride uneven, the gait of someone riding with a wooden peg instead of flesh and bone. Even at 200 yards, there was no mistaking him. Boone handed Marisol the glasses. "There's our one-legged friend." She studied him with cold focus, committing every detail to memory. When she lowered the glass, her voice was edged with iron. 2 more just stepped out of the storehouse, yellow hair scar on his face. The other short, dark-haired, missing a finger. Boone felt his gut tighten. Cyrus Kane. Virgil Pike. And if Willowhawk's words held true, Garrett Wells himself wasn't far. It was too neat, too perfect. A hideout until the storm blew over. The rest of the afternoon they watched patient as cougars noting patterns and defenses. These weren't drunk drifters. Their watch rotations, their easy access to rifles, the way they scanned the horizon, all reeked of military drill. Boone muttered. "They're professionals," good Marisol said with quiet fire. I prefer enemies worth the fight. Darkness fell, cloaking their approach. They crept closer, slipping from cover to cover, until they crouched behind a stack of freight crates less than 50 yards from the main house. Through the window glow, they saw it plain 4 men around a rough pine table. Whiskey bottles, scattered cards, dealt laughter rising. At the head of the table sat Wells, tall, lean, near 40, face weathered by sun and dust. A revolver rested at his hip, a rifle leaned within easy reach. To his right sat Cyrus Kane, yellow hair catching the lamplight scar down his cheek. On his left, Virgil Pike, compact frame, the gap of a missing finger on his hand. The last man was a stranger, but no less armed. Garrett Wells Marisol whispered the name tasting like ash. Boone tracked him through the glasses, studying every tell the way. Wells leaned back, easy, the way the others deferred. This was his court. Boone exhaled slow. 4 against 2. Not the best odds. Numbers matter less than surprise, Marisol answered. And the truth, we know they're killers. They don't. Still, Boone's mind churned. Storming the place meant crossfire from every angle. A siege. Too much risk of reinforcements. They needed another way. As if sensing eyes on him, Wells strolled to the window and looked out into the night. Boone's heart froze. For long seconds, Wells stared into the dark. Then he shrugged, turned, and joined the game again. Boone leaned close to Marisol. We need them outside. Split if we can. Her answer was simple. Fire. It took him a heartbeat to catch her meaning. Fire would force them into the open sow panic. But it would also consume evidence, might kill the animals penned nearby. She pointed to the smaller storehouse. Downwind. Smoke will drive them out. It won't spread unless we want it. The plan was plain and deadly: draw the wolves into the open, then strike. Risky, yes, but less so than charging a fortified den. They slipped like shadows to the rear of the storehouse. The structure was old, brittle, crammed with hay and supplies. Perfect tinder. Marisol drew a flint and steel from her pouch, her hands sure Apache trained. Within minutes, a thin tongue of flame licked up the dry grass. Boone's breath caught as the fire leapt fast, feeding on dust and years of neglect. In moments, the back wall was alive with light, and smoke curled upward, ready to choke the killers from their den. Within minutes, the storehouse was spitting smoke and flame fire, licking through the roof like a devil set loose. Shouts tore from the main building as the men inside scrambled. Doors banged open, and they spilled out half-dressed weapons in hand boots half pulled on. The whole place is catching, Garrett Wells bellowed, his voice carrying across the yard. Get the horses before they bolt. Just as Eli Boone Laramie and Marisol 2 Moons had counted, on the 4 split, 2 ran for the corral, while Wells and Virgil Pike dashed toward the creek with buckets. It was the break they needed. Boone rose from the shadows, rifle braced, his voice slicing through the smoke. Garrett Wells, you stand charged for the murder of the Monroe family. The effect was instant. All 4 froze, shock written plain before training snapped them back. Wells dove behind a trough, Colt in hand, before Boone could blink. Cyrus Kane dropped low-scarred face, twisted his rifle, already hunting for targets. Virgil Pike limped toward cover, and Amos Whiteface Greeley melted into the shadows. Lay down your guns, Boone barked, though he knew damn well they wouldn't. We saw what you did, a shot cracked back in answer, splintering the wood near Boone's head. The fight had begun. Marisol vanished into the night, a ghost in the smoke, moving with the silence of a hunter born to it. Boone trusted she was already working the flank as he drew fire. Gunfire lit the compound in flashes, the blaze throwing wild shadows that made every shot a gamble. Boone crept closer, reading the fight by muzzle flashes and shouted curses. It was a deadly game of patience and nerves, the first mistake likely to settle the outcome. From the corral came a scream, sharp and short, then silence. A voice called, panicked. The Apache got Jake. 3 left, but fear was creeping in, cracking their confidence. Wells fired wildly from his cover bullets, slamming into Boone's woodpile until chips stung his face. Boone shifted rolling left and fired 2 quick rounds. The first sparked off the metal trough. The second tore through, followed by a grunt of pain and the heavy thud of a body hitting dirt. Wells was down wounded, but still breathing. At the same moment, the one-legged veteran broke from the fence trying for the main house. Boone led him with steady aim, squeezed, and the man dropped hard, his wooden leg clattering separate across the ground. 2 down, Boone called into the smoke. The answer was another volley, but the rhythm told him Cyrus Kane was rattled. Boone ducked low, changing angles, keeping pressure steady. From near the creek came Marisol's voice, low and certain. 1 left behind the forge. The last gunman had dug into the stone building holding the high ground and clean lanes of fire. It was a strong position, but Marisol had patience on her side. She waited him out like game in a snare. When he moved, breaking cover for a better angle, her rifle cracked once. He dropped without a sound. "It's finished," she called, stepping from the shadows, rifle still ready though the fight was done. Boone rose, breath ragged, and crossed the yard, checking the bodies. Cyrus Kane lay still. Virgil Pike, lifeless where he'd fallen. Amos Greeley, sprawled in the dust. Garrett Wells bled from a torn shoulder, unconscious, but alive for now. The fire hissed low, the horses stamped, restless in the corral, and silence rolled back over Crow Creek crossing. Boone knew the night had settled 1 score, but others were yet to come. "This one will live to face a judge," Eli Boone Laramie muttered, crouching beside Garrett Wells, where he bled in the dirt. "If we can haul him to a town with a real jail, Marisol," 2 Moons answered, already thinking 2 steps ahead. Together they bound his wound tight enough to keep him breathing, then lashed him with ropes that would hold firm through the long miles to come. From Wells' belongings, they pulled enough evidence to hang him twice over badges, papers, and gear that told a story of betrayal for coin. By dawn, Crow Creek crossing lay silent, but for the hiss of the dying fire. Boone and Marisol saddled Ranger and packed their prisoner, strapping him across his own horse like cargo bound for justice. Behind them, black smoke curled skyward from the burned storehouse, a pyre for men who had gambled their souls for profit and lost. For the Monroe family, there would finally be a reckoning. For the Apache, the war Wells had schemed to ignite would be stayed at least for now. It wasn't a clean victory. Too many had already fallen, too much blood soaked into the earth. But it was the best the frontier ever offered justice clawed from chaos. They turned south as the sun climbed the mountains, rising around them like a cathedral of stone, vast and unchanging, watching without judgment as human lives flared and faded beneath. Behind them lay smoke and silence. Ahead, a chance at peace, hard-won, bought in lead and fire. The hunt was done. But Boone and Marisol knew their road together was only beginning. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.